Ian, hi. Welcome to Sim Sundays. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Very, very good. Very good. We've walked a long and winding road for this podcast. And little behind the scenes secret is that we've already recorded the first 20 minutes of this
Yeah.
twice already when you were in Munich, but dodgy internets, dodgy Airbnbs. Here we are again. So we're gonna have to just like pretend that we've never spoken before, and this is all totally fresh.
Yeah, no, I think some of it is going to be in the vlog um that I recorded. Uh Probably just a little bit of talking and then just fuck, the Wi-Fi went out. So
Thank God it was a
yeah.
LAN event, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank God it wasn't wireless. But yeah, it's that was interesting cuz the actual room in the like area was really cool. It was just so unfortunate that the Wi-Fi went down.
hmm
That's sort of like the story of Europe
Yeah.
to me, where it's like everything looks, everything is and looks incredible. You guys, it's believe it or not, you guys have a lot more like newer stuff than we do.
Huh.
When it comes to just amenities or buildings, like environments, all that stuff. But
Like
there's
what?
all
Like what? So are you talking
well,
like
it's
hand
just like
dryers in toilets, or are we talking like
Well, yeah,
tech?
it's like bathrooms, like chairs are newer,
The chairs.
buildings are newer. Like it's just like that podcast room was literally like an enclosed room with glass as walls everywhere.
hmm
Um,
Like Succession.
yeah, but yeah, and then everything's great. Like nine things are great, right? And then it's just lacking the 10th thing, which is Wi-Fi. Hey,
hmm
we just built a studio without Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
You know
Small,
what?
small
Yeah,
detail.
yeah. Where well, it's small, but like it's very important.
Yeah.
So it's like the little things, like the bullet trains, the speed trains, the high
hmm
speed trains. Like they go fast. They're very comfortable. They're very nice. But does the AC work at
Nope.
all? Not right. Nope. Nope. So it's like you get there quickly, but you got another thing to worry about. So that's sort of what I realize about Europe, because
The
I've been to
quirks.
Paris and the UK a lot, but not necessarily anywhere else. So
Mm. Yeah, well, it was kind of the perfect storm. We were in the weirdest little Airbnb outside Paul Ricard, the sim racing team were racing there. You were in Munich, I believe,
yeah,
for the summit. But we'll get into all that. And I think it would be worth kind of going through why you've just done your European trip. What have you been doing? Where have you been? So our audience, you
yeah,
listeners, sim racers, Crimsix is a new name on the scene for us, but a lot of people who listen, if they're into any other kind of gaming, they will have heard your name. So why don't you tell us what you're doing in Europe, and then we'll work backwards from there.
gotcha. So I'm on Faze Clan, and basically we are sponsored by Porsche. So I sort of had the opportunity to. I knew I was going to go into Stuttgart to their headquarters, sort of in the middle of June, and it was sort of like a two birds with one stone thing, because it was like, do you want to go to Munich um, to cast the major? And
The
my
ESL R1 major,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, and sort of like this was like the finalist, the final mode, the season ending tournament. So it was the big one, and ideally, when I was ignorant, I was sort of like, yeah, like that's my goal, is to make it to that major. And then, a month or two in, I was like, probably not going to happen. Probably not going to happen. This is a lot more complicated and difficult than I once thought. Um, but one of my main things in gaming um, was or is that if you lose a tournament, or I come from FPS, Call of Duty. Um, my number one rule is if you lose a tournament, you watch out the rest of the tournament. So, like,
I like that.
Yeah, so you sort of let it sting, let it burn, just to make sure, like, in the back of your head, you're always telling yourself, like, don't ever let this happen again. Like, that should be you up there, not these guys. So that's why I
would you
wanted
say
to go.
then, for your casual Warzone player, they're playing, they start with 150 people, they go in, they forget to open the chute, and they die. You're saying you should now sit and watch the whole Warzone right to the end, see who wins, because that would sting.
No, not in that regard. Because you like Warzone. I mean, I did a bunch of Warzone stuff too. It's different because in Warzone you can lose or get knocked out. You could die to someone who's worse than you. So, like, in that regard, I wouldn't do it for that. But if there's someone better than me, there's always a case to learn. And if at a tournament, it's different because when you actually lose to someone who is flat out better than you. So that's sort of my rule of thumb, is that if you lose to someone who's better than you, or even if you think that they got lucky, you should still watch and try to dissect like what they're doing, what they did to beat you. So,
and you applied that same concept to R1, right?
Yeah. But the biggest thing is sort of the emotional, mental aspect of it, because you want to basically make yourself feel like crap for losing. And like any time where I'll go watch a tournament, because like I've followed that rule like 80% of the time. There's some where it's like, you're in the losers final and you just lost. Like, you don't really want to like go watch the next match, because you're still sort of heated and sort of compromised. But yeah, it's mainly to just let yourself know mentally, like, to never let it happen again. So never underperform. And what that's going to do is it's going to make you practice harder, smarter, more efficiently than you did before, because there's always levels to this stuff. So
yeah, I can see that. And it's interesting that that's applied pretty much 1-to-1 across from Call of Duty to sim racing and Rensport, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can literally use that for anything.
Yeah. So let's go back then for our sim racing listeners. Obviously, you're, let's say, famous for your Call of Duty exploits. One of the most decorated esports players of all time, and the sim racing world is now super interested in you, because you've moved across from one esport to a totally different esport with a whole different set of inputs, etc. That we'll get to. And I'd love to go into that transition, and then let's talk about Rensport. But first, just to give our listeners like a sense of the scale of what you were doing before, give us just a synopsis of your COD career. I know you started in Halo and then went across to COD. So give us a quick synopsis of that career, and also give us a sense of the events, the size of these events that you were competing in, because it doesn't exist in sim racing.
Yeah, so I guess I started playing Call of Duty. It's really that's a long answered question. I'm trying to summarize, because I played Call of Duty and FPS games in general for like 20 years. I started when I was like 8 years old. The first tournament that I ever competed in, I went pro in. And not only pro was like top 16, top 8. I believe it was top 8 at the time. And that's team wise. So I think we got third. So it was like beyond pro. It was like, you can actually win. But I turned pro at like 11. I retired when I was 29, so like 18 years. Went somewhere in the middle of that. Went to Halo, went pro in that, and then went back to college. Well, I played Battlefield for a little bit, for an imaginary $1.6 million tournament.
Wow.
Shout out Virgin Gaming. Yeah, I say imaginary because they announced it and never happened.
Yeah, that sounds like a whole story right there.
Oh yeah. Oh dude, it's stories on stories. But I don't regret that part at all, honestly, because it was probably some of the most fun I've had in competitive esports.
Mm.
And it was very different. But anyways, Call of Duty. So I came back to Call of Duty when I was around 20, or 21. I think it was like 20. So in 9 years, I won 38 tournaments, 3 world championships, 2 X Games medals. I think at one point, I think I ended my career with like it was around 50-50, for percentage of like tournaments I went to versus tournaments I won. So it was like, I think I ended with like around 100 tournaments that I went to, and I won. Yeah, well, I don't know if it was, I think I went to like 90 tournaments or something like that. Maybe 85, but either way, it was close to 50-50.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, I was sort of, my whole goal was to be sort of like the best teammate there's ever been in Call of Duty, because everyone's trying to get the highest KD, the the most MVPs and all this stuff. And I sort of went about it, especially coming from Halo, because Halo is so focused on teamwork and the team aspect of things, that I sort of had an advantage coming back to Call of Duty, because no one was focused on the team aspect. No one was focused on, hey, how can I make my teammates around me better? So that was, key to my successes right there. It was, I was sort of like an enabler of teammates and pushing teammates to be the best version of themselves while also doing it for me. So,
And to describe one of these events, and again, the reason I'm asking these questions is because sim racers
yeah,
who only follow sim racing will have
yeah,
no idea. And obviously, prior to this interview, I watched a lot of YouTube
yeah,
videos about some of the tournaments you were at, and they're enormous.
yeah. I mean, well, I think the biggest venue we played in front of, like people wise, crowd wise, was one of the ESWCs. Was playing Gotaga in the finals. And we absolutely massacred them. Side note. But there was like 4,000 people, I think. I believe, I don't know if it's for certain, but I'm assuming that this is the only event they could have watched at. But a couple drivers, like professional drivers, told me like they watched me play at that tournament. So
I mean, the viewing figures for these tournaments are a whole different world from sim racing, right?
oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, that's sort of why I think sim racing, because right now it's basically it's sort of stuck from being a hobby to a profession. Right now, it's like, to me, the biggest ruling factor is the prize money. I give the example of, like, people want to talk about the games, it's or this and that, or the equipment's too expensive. All these other things that are true, right? But the root cause of it is that, like, the sim racing community, like the competitive side, they're playing for borderline nothing. Like, at the ESL Munich major, um I asked like how many of these people up here, the 12 best in the world, could live on their own or are living on their own right now without, not living with their parents, not working another job, this and that. And it was like, I think it was like I asked Enzo about it on
Mm,
Redline, and he was like, I don't know, maybe 6 to 8 people
yeah.
out of every. That's not just the people here. That's out of everyone.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's the issue right there, is that these prize pools need to go drastically up, because once the prize pools go up, right, there's more competition, there's more like, hey, there's more to play for. Like, for those of you guys who don't know, like, orgs will take a cut of the prize pool as well. And I use the example, I think it was Ludwig or someone did a tic-tac-toe $300,000 competition on live stream, and it was nuts. Like, it was absolutely nuts. Like, you can, if you throw a competition and have prize money, you can, dude, you can quite literally do it for anything. And the more money is involved, the more intense it's going to be, the better, like, entertainment, viewing value. It's all just going to be, everything's going to be elevated. And then you bring the competition up. You also bring up the competition of like, hey, there's 2 orgs that want 1 driver. Let's see who pays them more.
Mm,
So, and then ultimately you get higher salary. You can basically, afford to live by yourself, and not only just live, but like comfortably live. So that's one thing that like is sort of the difficult part, because I think that's what happened in Call of Duty, because when they announced COD Champs, which is a $1 million tournament every single year, and I mean now it's way more. It's like 5 million or something, or I think 2.5. But the whole year, the whole prize pool in the year is $5 million. Where in sim racing, dude, before ESL R1, like what's the question for you is, what's the biggest, like, over a year, a course of 8 to 12 months, what's the biggest prize pool there is?
the largest that I think I've ever seen is 75,000 euros, which, and that would
Like,
be across several
yeah,
events, right?
yeah. Well, I'm talking like not just individual, like everyone.
Yeah. Well, I mean that's it, right? Because out of you might get 20 entrants for that, and
Yeah,
only one might win it. It's the prize pools are absolutely tiny in comparison. Like, you don't have
yeah,
to Google Crimsix very long before you see a news story about you being the first to win $1 million in prize money, and then people have kind of
yeah,
have got it since. But it's it's a totally different world. I suppose the only saving grace, silver line, that you might be able to identify with sim racing is because it's so close to the real world of motorsport. You
yeah,
have some very large brands that are able to back it as a marketing exercise. So take the F1 esports series, for
yep,
example. All the F1 teams will have their own drivers, which they pay them full-time salaries, um, and that's because they can use it as a marketing activation for the rest of the team. Whereas
yep,
obviously in Call of Duty, the world's like militaries aren't really
yeah,
like backing a team for marketing purposes. It'd be kind of cool if they did or
yeah.
were.
No, I mean, to me, that's sort of the only. I think if you're doing sim racing right now, um, to not go into real life racing. I mean, I don't get me wrong, I understand it, right? Because sim racing, to me, the biggest issue is it's so much more fun to play than it is to watch. So
Mm,
that's why it's like, I don't know how to effectively change that. But that's the issue why, you don't see a lot more viewers and you don't see a lot more fans, is that it is quite literally 10 to 15 times, maybe 100 times more fun to play than it is to watch. So that to me is one issue, but the other issue is just like, it's so expensive to get into. Um, console wise, like, I got in a Call of Duty with like $300.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
know, just buy an Xbox and I'm in and play on my TV. But yeah, I mean, for me, the end goal is I'm sort of using the sim racing stuff to build my skills up to the point where it's like, hey, if there is a racing opportunity in real life, like let's do it. Because I don't want to. Well, I always give this example. I don't know if you've seen the Michael Fassbender stuff, the Porsche documentary series on YouTube. But I mean, you know, Michael Fassbender is an actor. Um, you know, he's still doing that at the same time, I believe, even though I haven't seen him in a movie recently. Um, but yeah, they threw him into like the hardest possible, the highest possible like endurance racing. Well, not the highest, but you know, GTE. So not the hypercar stuff, but they basically just threw him into that straight to the top. And you know, I think they're 3 years in, and he's still struggling with it. And for me, it's like damn, I'm not Michael Fassbender, you know, like I actually have to, even though I have a story of like, you know, I once did this and I'm coming into something new, see what happens, right? Like I still don't want to shoot myself in the foot with that. Like I want to build up the skills, I want to build up the talent. I want to like actually be able to like belong there and do this, and not just do this, but like be good at doing this um before any sort of, you know, content filming, or before all the other stuff to me comes in. So like the, you know, content, sponsors, activations, all this stuff, like I want to actually prove my worth before any of that happens, you know. And it's not just for like the people watching or the people trying to see the story. It's like mainly it's for me, you know, because if I feel like I don't belong in a place, if I didn't, you know, earn my right to be here, like that's always going to be in the back of my head. So, I mean, that to me, like sim racing in a nutshell is practice, and it's sort of like the test before the test, to me. So, but that's my end goal, is to jump into the real thing.
Well, that's very interesting, because I think a lot of people have used sim racing for that exact reason, and a lot of
Yeah.
people have started in sim racing, and then without them really planning it, it's led to opportunities in real world racing. For example, you know, James Baldwin, who you'll have raced with.
Yep.
He's now looking to do some real world racing. He did, I think it was 24 Hours of Spa last year, and he makes no secret of the fact that he wants to go out there and do real world racing, and that's kind of
Yep.
a strength of sim racing. But I mean, I've said it on this podcast probably about 100 times that sim racing has a blessing and a curse. The blessing and the curse is
Yeah.
the fact that it's so
Yep.
close to motorsport. So it's a blessing if you want to go and immerse yourself in it, i.e., by participating. It's a
Yep.
curse for watching, because you could just go and watch real motorsport, which is like, you know, almost exactly the same but real. And so the
Yeah.
differentiator for sim racing is a negative rather than
Mm-hmm.
a positive. So that's really interesting. So I was gonna ask you why you chose sim racing as your next esports venture, but it sounds like it's to get into the world of racing. So that leads me to another question, which is,
Yep.
how long have you been a motorsport fan for? When did your kind of love of motorsport and racing start?
Um. Well, I sort of I actually started around like when the Porsche 919 was out, basically, and I think that was like what, 2014, 2015, 2016,
Mm.
somewhere around there. Um but so I was one of the few, like I knew about the other sort of styles of racing. um I think I was one of the only Americans that actually knew about a form of racing outside IndyCar and NASCAR. Um, and I was sort of watching the motorsport stuff before I even found out about F1. Like I was watching endurance stuff before F1, because I sort of, while most American kids will be growing up watching ESPN or football or basketball or all this stuff, like I was watching like Top Gear episodes.
Interesting.
Yeah, so like I would record those and watch those. And it was great because it was like 20 seasons to catch up
Hmm.
on or whatever.
Yeah.
So it took a while. But so I sort of knew about all this stuff from the get-go. And this was before I even won my first like Call of Duty tournament. So I've been sort of following it for a while. And what ended up happening was I used a lot of the Call of Duty winnings and salary and all this stuff for cars. So I mean, like, I remember the first time I so I joined Optic. We moved into their house. Nade Shot had an M3. Big Timer had like a C63 AMG,
Nice.
and I would pretty much go get them. Like this is before Uber Eats and all and Postmates. So I'd
Right.
literally go offer to go get them like chicken nuggets if I could drive their car to go get them. But sort of knew about all this stuff, and then like we did a little track experience thing. The first time I was ever on track was in a Ferrari 458 GT3. Or I don't know, it's what the F430 GT3. So the first time I was ever on track was in a straight up GT3 car,
That's
and
nuts.
I knew I was somewhat good because they're like, yeah, you just did that. Like the guy was amazed. He's like, you just did it 1.7 seconds off pros, and he's like amazed. He's like, what's your experience? Like because it was one of those like you pay for 11 laps, this and that, and they're like, what's your experience? I'm like, Forza 3. I literally said Forza 3, and the guy's like, what? He's like, what do you drive at home? I'm like, a Volkswagen Jetta, manual. It was like a hand-me-down car from my parents. So I literally had no experience outside of video games to be able to do that.
And presumably that was a controller that you played Forza on.
Yeah, and I use a fucking controller. So
but you knew those lines.
Yeah, well, I didn't even know the lines either. I was just listening to the direction. It was one of those tracks in Vegas. But that was sort of the moment when I knew, like, hey, this, like, if stuff doesn't work out in Call of Duty, like, video games translate to real life. It was just like the understanding of the car, listening to his directions, the inputs and all this stuff. I knew it was transferable in that very moment because I had no business being that close to them, time wise. So it was an interesting moment. But I knew right then and there that was like a potential thing to do if things didn't work out on Call of Duty. I don't know how I would do it at the time, but that was the main thing. It was like, that's such a huge switch that I don't think I should do it now.
Yeah,
but
and at that time, sim racing was nowhere near what it is now, so there wasn't this kind of obvious switch to make. Right?
that was like 2016. So yeah.
So usually when we have guests on, I ask them to go through their rig. So because I love it, I'm a massive nerd, so I love to hear about the hardware, like the wheels, the pedals. Are you using triple screens, ultra, whatever? But you've just said that you used some of your winnings to buy cars. So let's go through that as well.
Okay.
What as a self-confessed petrol head who also, I love the fact that you got into motorsport through Top Gear. I've not heard that one before, but I can so easily see how that could happen.
That sort of made me realize that there's a different world outside the
Mm.
US. Because it was just, people would be like Fast and Furious, like that's how they think you drive cars, or people would be talking about,
Oh God, I
stop
hate
or
those films.
like doing a straight line little like or like a freeway pull or something like that. I'm
The
like,
quarter mile.
yeah, no, yeah, exactly. And then that made me realize, like, yo, you guys are all posers. Like every single one of you are posers. Like driving in a straight line is not difficult. Doing basically all the American things
Changing gear like
for
8 times.
yeah, for good driving is not difficult at all. I can tell you this much, coming from Germany to back to Texas, that the roads here, you can borderline do it with your eyes closed. It's just so straight. Where there, it's like, there might not be a guardrail next to this cliff. You got U-turns, or not U-turns. You got roundabouts. We don't even have those in the US. It's just basically a lot of turning. And I absolutely miss it. I love it. But yeah, we'll go through the rig. Let me see if I can change the camera.
Yeah,
I may have
and
to.
the cars as well. It'd be cool to go through the cars.
Well, I would have to switch to my phone. It's in the garage. Are you saying the
all
actual
good.
car?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a good
Yeah, I
friend of
could just
mine
join on my
who
phone.
is a huge fan of yours. He actually told me recently that he's got one of your T-shirts on his on his
really?
wall in his gaming room. Yeah.
That's
He said
crazy. Not
that I
that
should
many
look
people
out for the
bought them.
blue Porsche story.
I think I know who you're talking about. But basically, in like this position, see my shoulders. So this is basically how you would game,
Right.
and pretty much all my like shoulder joints and all this stuff, like it's basically ideal for sitting in a chair. But the problem is like my legs and my knee joints, all this stuff. Like I have to put in, if say the best in the world is putting in 4 hours a day, I have to put in 8. So it's very. I've been basically working on my physical fitness to try to be up to like par with being able to do it that much.
This is for sim racing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's for sim racing, but it's also in the event where they're like, hey, you're good enough. Do you want to hop in a GT4 car and actually compete? I don't want to be in this situation where it's like, yeah, I'm down, but can you give me 9 months?
Right.
Because I'm not physically fit right now.
Yeah.
That would be like one of my biggest fears.
The other thing about sim racing that's interesting is because in sim racing you can do so much more practice. I've spoken to a lot of pro esports sim racers, guys like the Team Redline guys who race with Max Verstappen, who have said that because they've done hours and hours and hours of practice in their rigs, we're talking kind of like 7 or 8 hours a day, which is probably on average 8 times as much as an actual racing driver. A lot of them are starting to get problems with their knees and shoulders because they're just kind of going over that same motion over and over again all day, every day.
Well, that's the best thing about Call of Duty. That's the best thing about Call of Duty. So the best thing, and it's sort of only about Fortnite too, is like it's not the money you make or the like how you can now live and all this stuff. The best thing about Call of Duty, at least, is the fact that everyone plays Call of Duty. So I basically reached out to a guy that I knew that's on like SEAL Team 6, or he was, and I was like, hey, I need to strengthen my knee joints, like my legs. I need to get way thinner. I need to get to this size of a waist. And they basically, he gave me a workout to do.
That's very cool.
I've been following that. So
it sounds tough though. It doesn't sound like a fun one. It's not. It doesn't sound like a stick a podcast on and have 45 minutes in the gym kind of
Well,
session.
for a month or so, it was like you do the workouts and you'd be exhausted.
Yeah.
But now it's at the point where your body sort of adjusts, and now you're able to actually be functioning the rest of the day.
Well, that sounds nice. Yeah. Nicer. Okay, so do we want to go through the cars, the rig, and then it would be cool to start chatting a little bit about the transition that you've made across from COD to sim racing.